Hi, and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 632. And today's date is April 2nd, 2015, and the title of this episode is, As the Economic Collapse Accelerates, War is on the Horizon. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand that Greece is actually running out of time. We understand that they have an emergency loan happening right now, which will bring them up to a certain period. And right now it's April 9th, where they're saying, hey, we're going to be running out of cash. And we're going to need more cash to keep the government going. Now, we understand that Greece is looking at Russia. It looks like they might be pivoting to Russia. And we can see the Russian Economic Development Minister said in early March that Russia would look into ways of easing the food embargo for Greece and Hungary, which does not contradict the World Trade Organization. Russia, they plan to start checks on the livestock enterprises of Greece, Cyprus, and Hungary to speed up the beginning supplies from these countries if the food embargo is lifted. And we have to remember the other countries heard about this, and they said, hey, we want the same thing. Actually, all the countries in the Eurozone would love to start exporting their food to Russia, because right now they are hurting. And the food embargo lasts until August of this year. And it doesn't mean that Russia won't renew it, but again, they did this back in August. It lasted 1 year, and here we are moving towards that time period. And of course, as we know, the economies of the Eurozone, they are struggling. They would love to have commerce with Russia once again. Now, Beppe Grillo from Italy is saying that, you know what? The EU has already collapsed. This type of economy, he said, is completely misplaced. And not only in Italy, it isn't good enough for Europe and the whole world. Growth, jobs, and again growth. The coming decade will see a 50% job cut. Our metal production plants, fashion houses, wineries, all our core assets are now on the line. Milan is the home of major international food industry exhibition, yet its sponsors are McDonald's and Coca-Cola. We are an upside down world, and we need to get back to our feet to understand it. And if we fail to understand it, we will be easy prey for the others, for corporate interests, for central bankers. And again, these countries are hurting at this point. But most of them are in a depression. They are collapsing, and they're just holding on at this time. And we could see by continuous debt, by unemployment, by austerity, the situation is not getting better whatsoever. Now, here in the States, what do we see? Well, we know that ADP came out with their numbers, and it didn't look too good. But don't worry, the BLS came out with theirs, and they're saying initial jobless claims slide again. People are not putting in for unemployment. They're just, no one's getting laid off. No one's losing their job. Those people who work part-time, if they don't meet a certain number of hours, haven't received a certain number of dollars, they're just not counted. But they're counted on the other side. If they have the part-time job, they're counted as full-time. So it really doesn't make sense the way they're handling this. And of course, as we know, it's completely manipulated in the way they want to show the world of how the economy is really doing. And all they continually do is manipulate all the numbers. And if it doesn't work out, they manipulate them even more. I mean, look at this. A month ago, in the factory orders numbers, there was something very disturbing. The annual rate of decrease in factory orders dropped by negative 2.3%. The last two times this happened was in 2008, just after the failure of Lehman, and in 2001, just as the U.S. was again entering a recession. On the surface, it was actually a beat. The factory orders seem to be looking pretty good, and we saw it all over the corporate media saying, hey, factory orders are going up. They rose by 0.2% relative to the negative 0.4% expected. However, if one actually looks at the underlying number, February was still a miss because the January print was revised much, much lower. And this is how they manipulate the numbers. They go back in time, they lower the number, and they say, okay, look, this new number looks good. And they do this with real estate. They do this with GDP. They do this with unemployment. With anything they can manipulate, anything that's statistical and they can manipulate, this is what they do. And when I say they, I'm talking about the United States government central bankers. Now, we can see at this point, things are not going well in the economy. I mean, manufacturing, factory orders, all down. Unemployment, those numbers aren't real. I mean, we had the CEO of Gallup come out and say, yeah, these are fake. These unemployment numbers, they could not possibly be real. And we know they're not, because those people who are continually looking but cannot find that job, they're just not counted. There's like 93 million people out of the labor force at this time. We see U.S. imports collapsed most since Lehman. U.S. trade balance just tumbled and printed its smallest monthly deficit since 2009. Here's the answer. In January, U.S. imports in the goods, not services column plunged from $232 billion to $222 billion. A whopping $10.2 billion, or a 4.4% drop, and the biggest monthly decline in the U.S. imports since the peak of the financial crisis in the aftermath of the Lehman collapse. So we're back where we started. Nothing has improved. The Baltic Dry Index is declining once again. It was pushed up a little bit, and we noticed that it was the capsize rates. They increased, and here we are. No one needs raw materials because the consumers aren't out there. They're not purchasing. Since they're not purchasing, guess what? Manufacturing, factory orders are down. If they're not creating anything in the factories, guess what? They don't need the raw materials, and this is why the Baltic Dry Index continually drops. And again, the Baltic Dry Index is quite, I guess, insulated from speculators. So this is a good reading on how the economy is doing. And right now it's around 588 points. And if we look back a year ago when the economy was much worse because unemployment was higher, things weren't as good as today, why was the Baltic Dry Index almost 3 times as much as it is right now? Something doesn't make sense. Now, you can go with the statistical numbers and believe those and say, that must be the real economy. That must be what the economy is really doing. Or you can look at all the retail stores closing, the people getting unemployed, the auto industry not doing well, how GM is channel stuffing, how the government is purchasing the automobiles to make it look like they have sales. The real estate industry is imploding. Prices are coming down. Houses are on the market longer and longer. They laid off thousands upon thousands of people in the mortgage departments. To me, it's self-evident that everything that we're seeing and actually happening here and in Canada and Australia, UK, Eurozone, we are collapsing, and they know it. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to drag in as many people as they possibly can to pump up these bubbles. We talked about the auto industry. We talked about the real estate industry. How they're letting in all the subprime people. And yesterday I said, those people are drying up. And what's very interesting, a story came out that since the subprime people are not coming in, they're going to make it even easier for people to come in. Forget it. What we're going to do is we're not even going to look at your FICO scores. We're going to throw those out. We're going to make up a completely new way to figure out if you're creditworthy to purchase an automobile, to purchase a home. So what are they going to do? And you have to remember, they need to do all of this to pump up the bubble. Millions of Americans unable to obtain credit cards, mortgages, auto loans from banks will receive a boost with a launch of a new credit score aimed at consumers regarded as too risky by lenders. The new metric, set to be announced as soon as this week, is being developed by Fair Isaac Corp., creator of the most widely used consumer credit scores, and is being tested in a pilot phase with credit card issuers. Fair Isaac said it hopes to make as many as 53 million people who don't have credit scores more acceptable to lenders. I mean, look what they're doing here. People without scores, in most cases, don't use debt either by choice or because of negative credit event, such as bankruptcy, foreclosure, or a collection account, has shut them out of the mainstream borrowing. But we need to let them back in because we need to pump up these bubbles. Because if we don't, the system crashes now, and the U.S. government, the central bankers, are now blamed. The new score, which isn't yet named, will be calculated based on consumers' payment history with their cable, cell phone, electric, and gas bills, as well as how often they change address and other factors. This is a desperate attempt, guess what, to boost the pool of eligible creditworthy mortgage recipients, and they're trying to bring anyone in they possibly can. Basically, if you have a heartbeat, we would love to give you a loan and put you into debt. You can get this brand new home. You can get this brand new automobile. We don't care if you can make the payments or not, as long as you expand the debt. And this is what they're doing at this point. And you can see they are creating more and more of these programs. Didn't we see this back in 2007, 2008? And what happened when we threw junk in to the subprime securities? We let everyone come in and purchase a home that really shouldn't have been purchasing a home. What did we see? We saw the entire system rip itself apart and crash. We are going to see the same thing happen right now. What are we throwing? Not we. What is the U.S. government central bankers? What are they throwing into the mix? Everything they possibly can, and they don't care what it is. So junk in, junk out. That's it. Period. The end. This is the end game, people. They're doing whatever they can to keep this system propped up until they can get that war started. This is why they're trying so hard right now. Now, what's very interesting is Texas is out there. And they have a bill that's going to basically legalize the authorizing use of gold and silver as legal tender. And this was introduced in the Texas State Senate last week. Senator Connie Burton, on March 11th, Senate Bill 1245, reaffirms gold and silver as legal tender in the state of Texas on a voluntary basis. And we can see other states have proposed bills or had passed the bill already. And there's around 25 states. Here are some of them: Arizona, Colorado, Georgia, Idaho, Indiana, Kansas, Louisiana, Maine, Minnesota, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, New Hampshire, Utah, Vermont, Tennessee, Virginia, Washington, and there are many others. And we can see right now, this is one of the good reasons why you should be holding some gold and some silver. Because when the system crashes, some states already, and I'm sure there's going to be more as time goes on, they're going to be introducing these bills, because once it catches on, more and more states will do it. Now, Iceland right now, as we know, they got rid of their bankers. They pretty much decided they're not going to be part of the EU system, and they took control of their economy away from the private Western Central Bank system. And they took it one step further. The Progress Party issued a report today that suggests taking the power to create money away from the commercial banks and hand it to the central bank, and basically, ultimately, they're going to give it to Parliament. So the government is going to actually end up creating the money, just like Canada should be doing, and that's why we have that Comer lawsuit going on, because the private Western Central Bank kind of stole that away. The United States, we have the Constitution that says the government should be creating our own money, and loaning it out without interest. And we see other countries are doing the same. And of course, if accepted in the Iceland parliament, the plan would change the game in very radical way. It would be successful too, because there is no bigger scourge on our economies than commercial banks creating money and then securitizing and selling off the loans they just created the money with. The private Western central bankers, are not going to be happy with this. Actually, if you look in the corporate media, they kind of stay away from Iceland. They don't want to tell anyone how their economy is doing, that it's improved since they did this. And once this goes full force and the government is creating the money and their economy really improves, I wouldn't be surprised if something happens in Iceland where they maybe get invaded or something. Maybe ISIS will turn up, because as you know, the central bankers do not like this whatsoever. And we can see they will not report on this whatsoever because they don't want anyone looking and seeing that once they got rid of the private Western central bank system, they create their money on their own, their economy improves. Now, China and Russia, they are proposing an economic corridor with Mongolia. The revival of the Great Silk Road that once linked China, Central Asia, and Europe won't stop at transport, but will build a new platform for economic development between China, Russia, and Mongolia. We are confident that this would bring economic benefit to our three countries and serve as a major boost to the economic advancements of Eurasia as a whole, and this is coming from the Chinese foreign minister. And yeah, we can see that China, Russia, many of the other BRIC nations, they're all making deals, trying to push the economies forward, build the infrastructure, and they're not looking to do this with troops like the U.S. is doing. The U.S. is trying to hold on to a system that is dying. This is why we see the military everywhere, keeping control of what they're doing at this point. China, Russia, the other BRIC nations, this is a developing system. They're trying to build it economically. There's no reason for troops. And we can see the difference. This is what Rome went through. As their system was dying, troops were spread out all over the globe. And again, the whole thing just fell apart because they couldn't maintain it. The same thing is going to happen here in the United States. It just cannot be sustained. And they know this, and this is why they're trying to provoke war. Now, as I've been talking about, China is trying to get the yuan renminbi as a reserve currency. Now, we know the U.S. government sees China as competition. They don't like this. They don't want the China-denominated AIIB bank. They don't like the BRICS system. And we know that China has been in talks with the IMF. They're trying to basically take the yuan, include it in the basket of reserve currencies. I mean, there are so many countries right now that are already supporting the yuan as a payment currency. There are 15 yuan clearing centers around the world, including London, Frankfurt, Paris, and Luxembourg. Even Los Angeles in the state of California has signed such a deal with the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China. And they didn't go to Washington to get the approval. They just did it. And of course, the U.S. government, they don't want this to happen. And they're going to do whatever they possibly can to stop it. And we have to remember, later this year, the IMF is going to look at the yuan renminbi and see if it fits into becoming a reserve currency. And you have to remember, the U.S. was supposed to give away some of their voting rights. They promised this back in 2010. They were going to give it to the emerging countries, and they never did this. They promised, but never followed through. And right now, the U.S. has about 18% of the vote on the IMF, and China only has 3.8%. So you can see where this is headed. The United States government central bankers are going to try to do whatever they possibly can to stop this from happening. And we see that U.S. Treasury Secretary Jacob Lew said China needs to loosen its financial controls before the yuan can qualify to be included in the IMF's basket. Basically, what he's saying is, yeah, we're not going to vote in this way. We're not going to let it happen. He's saying the yuan is really not ready. I mean, if they give us access to their bank and get us and use some of our technology so we have back doors, maybe then we can go ahead and approve it. But right now, we have no way of knowing or stealing any of their banking information right now, so we're just not going to let it happen. And we knew this was going to happen. They will do whatever they possibly can to stop this. But what's happening around the world, as these countries get more and more into debt, especially like Venezuela, Brazil, they look to the banking system of China, the BRICS system, as a last resort to get money. And a lot of countries are doing this now, where they're saying, you know something, forget about the IMF. We don't agree with their policies. We don't agree with austerity. And every country that we look at right now, they continually put them further and further into debt. And there's no way out of this. We don't see any economic growth. And they decide, hey, we're going to leave the IMF over to the side and move over to the Chinese-led banking system. And as more and more countries do this, the IMF will be left out, and China, Russia, the BRICS system will build up. And this is what we're seeing right now. Now, Judicial Watch is suing DHS for the hands-off list. The Department of Homeland Security was slapped with a Freedom of Information Act lawsuit in February. DC watchdog organization Judicial Watch announced Tuesday for refusing to comply with a July 2014 Freedom of Information Act. And you have to remember, Obama said, yeah, the White House, we're exempting ourselves from the Freedom of Information Act. And the original Freedom of Information request sought out a copy of the DHS Inspector General report regarding the hands-off list reportedly maintained by DHS, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and or U.S. Customs and Border Protection. The list, Judicial Watch says, was used to allow entry of particular individuals into the U.S. who have been previously denied entry or were made to undergo a secondary screening. And, of course, this is a list where most likely the U.S. government has used these people before in other operations. And, of course, they're listed as terrorists, and they created a list that's called Hands Off. And they can bring them right into the country with absolutely no problem. And, of course, this is a secret. And Judicial Watch made a request. They denied the request. And now they're suing. Because they don't want anyone to know what is going on. And what is going on here is they're bringing people into this country, and they're going to use these people to create a false flag event, to create an event that will bring us to war, that will bring down the economic system. Actually, it won't bring it down, it will just cover it up. They'll blame it on another country or group. And we know these people are already in place. They're just waiting for the green light, the go signal, where all of a sudden there is a cyber attack on the financial system. There's a cyber attack on the electrical infrastructure. There's maybe some physical attacks in some cities. And all this is getting ready to be done as soon as they run out of every single option. And once they're out of options, they will use this to go ahead and go to war. And of course to blame another country or group on this entire collapse of the monetary system. Now, it's not going to stop the collapse whatsoever. It's just going to cover it up. Now, Venezuela, as we know, they're creating that petition. They have about 6 or so million signatures on there showing the United States that Venezuela is not a national security threat. And Venezuela right now is planning to buy more Russian weapons. Actually, they understand, they realize, along with Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, Syria, and many other nations, they realize that the United States government central bankers are pushing war, and they're not going to stop. And all these countries are getting ready. And we can see Venezuela right now, they're bringing in more Russian weapons because they feel that they need to protect themselves and they don't know what's going to happen. Just like Russia now, since NATO and the US is building up the military assets in Eastern Europe, they have been all of a sudden, as we know, building up their military assets. The same with China, the same with North Korea, because you remember, all the players are the same. Now, out in Ukraine, we see the OSC. Their monitors have come under fire near the Donetsk airport. Kiev forces shelled a village near the embattled Donetsk airport in eastern Ukraine, and this is where the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, this is where they were visiting, and again, they were shelled upon. And we noticed something very interesting happening lately in Ukraine. They're finding more and more explosive devices in Kiev around the control of the Kiev government. And we noticed that one tanker was exploded. They found another explosive near a passenger train. And right now, they found 2 more explosive devices around in Kiev after an explosion occurred on Thursday morning, causing no injuries. Law enforcement have found 2 more devices, and the information on the exact place is not yet disclosed. But we know that the CIA, FBI, and other U.S. government officials are in Ukraine. And you notice how this is starting to ramp up all of a sudden, where we're seeing a lot more of these events occur, where all of a sudden we have explosives, and they're saying, oh, it's the southeastern people, and we can see what they're building up to. They're building up to the main false flag event. I mean, we had the Donetsk people out there saying that they have intercepted communiques, and they understand they have a document that says they're trying to, the Kiev is going to take agent provocateurs, plant them into the area of Donetsk and Lugansk, and basically create a false flag event, making it look like the people aren't safe there. And they're doing all of this because they want this war pushed forward. Now, Kiev right now, the parliamentary wing of the far-right sector organization, will be an autonomous part of Ukraine armed forces, financed by the state but free to name its own command. And you have to remember, Yarosh, he was the one out there saying that they need to get rid of the southeastern people. Just got to get rid of them, get all those people who are a threat to the authority, and the rest of the people will come in line. And we can see right now they're giving them extra powers at this point in time, because we can see they're getting ready to push a major offensive. Now, Russia right now is out there, and the Defense Ministry has issued a report on a forthcoming expansion of their national orbital grouping of the space echelon of the missile attack warning system. The launch of the first spacecraft of the new generation has been scheduled for the second half of 2015. The new generation satellites have a number of distinct features like an extended service life and the performance characteristics that are better by a factor of several times. The satellites have been created on a new component-based design and manufactured in Russia. No other technology was brought in, especially from the United States. Just one satellite in the new family will be able to replace several 5 or 6 satellites of the previous generation. And we can see that Russia right now is doing whatever they possibly can to protect themselves from what is coming. And again, we do not want to have war with Russia. Now, I'm not saying that Russia is incredible and great, but this is no Libya, Lebanon, Yemen. This is a superpower. A lot of their weapons are a lot better than the United States weapons. Actually, if you look at a lot of the United States weapons, a lot of them don't work, like the F-35. A lot of problems with that. A lot of our ballistic missiles are very old. And we can see right now, this is a superpower. This will end nuclear if we do this. And the central bankers, they don't care. They have no allegiance to any country or group. The allegiance is to themselves. They're prepared for this. They know their system's coming down, and they don't want to be blamed. And at the same time, they can thin out part of the population, because this is part of their agenda also. Now, we see the framework for the Iranian deal has been reached. U.S., German, Iranian officials have begun confirming early Thursday that the long-sought framework on Iran's nuclear deal has been reached. Now, the debate is, how much will be made public? The framework is simply the basis for future talks, which officials say will begin immediately, and the new goal is to have the final agreement in place by the end of June. Remember, the deadline is July 1st. And we can see already that they are working together. This is a peace deal. And of course, it's shrouded in it's a nuclear deal. And I think behind the scenes of all of this is the deal to sell the natural resources using the dollar, and for the U.S. IMF to come in and take control of the central banking system, just like they did throughout Europe. And they would like to do this with Iran. Here are some of the things that they've reached. This is their agreements. Iran will continue research and development program on advanced centrifuge machines. The Fordow nuclear facility will be turned into a research center for nuclear science and physics. More than 1,000 centrifuges will be maintained at the facility, and 2 centrifuge cascades will keep operating. The Arak heavy water reactor in the Iranian city will remain in place, but will be redesigned and updated. The redesigning process will greatly increase efficiency of the reactor while reducing the amount of plutonium produced in the facility. Following the implementation of the Comprehensive Joint Plan of Action, all the UN Security Council sanctions, as well as all economic and financial embargoes by the US and European Union, including bans on banks, issuance, investment, and all other related services in different fields, including petrochemical, oil, gas, and automobile industries, will be lifted. The Central Bank of Iran, other financial and banking institutions, SWIFT system, and the country's shipping and aviation sectors, and Iran's tanker company will be immediately lifted at once. Now, we hear all about this. We understand what they're doing. They're lifting the sanctions. They made some concessions on the nuclear deal. Now, what's left out of this completely is the oil that Iran has. What currency are they selling it with? You notice how that was completely left out. Iran's central banking system, does it fall in line with the private Western central bank system? And do they get to control it? That part was completely left out. Everything else is meaningless, because they were doing all of this before. They already had IAEA inspections. They were already part of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. They've already signed that. They were adhering to everything. They were not creating nuclear weapons whatsoever, even though the United States and Israel continually kept up the propaganda over 30 years that in any minute they're going to have a nuclear weapon and they're going to use it. It never happened because they weren't creating one. They were never found. They weren't there. Even when they were creating their nuclear facilities underground, they got approval to do this. Why did they want to do this? Because they didn't want Israel bombing it. Because, when you bomb it, you got to start all over again. And they had inspections in there. Absolutely nothing. There is no proof whatsoever. Now, even though there was a peace deal with Iran, with the P5+1, and they worked it all out, U.S. Secretary of Defense Ashton Carter said that a deal with Iran wouldn't necessarily prevent war. The U.S. will reserve the right to use military force to prevent Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. Even if a deal is reached, they will still strike Iran. So what is happening here? So basically there was a peace deal that was drawn up with all these different countries. The U.S. is signing it, and they're still talking about bombing. The United States government is being controlled by outside forces, and they all have different agendas. We have the central banking system, which has a certain agenda. We have Israel, that pays off many congressmen. They have a certain agenda. And all of this is not jiving anymore, and they are not working for the people of the United States. They are working for other entities. And this is why we see all of this out here. I mean, we see Congress out there saying, we're going to impose more sanctions if that deal is reached. We're going to bomb, and we're going to do this, we're going to do that. You know what? If they want war so bad, all these people, they need to get into their camouflage uniforms, take their rifles, and their family, their cousins, they all need to be on the front lines, leading us to prove to us why we need to go to war. Because if they can't do this, we're not going to war. The people are sitting back going, no, forget it. Prove to us why this war is so important, instead of saying, yes, we need to go to war, and pointing at other people that should go in and fight the war. You know what? You start off fighting, let me know how it's going, and let me know if it's worth it. Then the people will make up their mind if we should go in and fight. But guess what? We don't have leaders today. They're all scared. They're all the people that hide behind the desks and like other people to go out there and do their dirty work. Well, it's time for them to do the dirty work. We see Israel out there warning that they're going to have a military option as Iran talks drag on and a deal is made. And I'm a little bit nervous. I'm hoping that nothing happens during this period in the next couple of weeks where Israel, the U.S., they decide to go rogue, like McCain was saying, and go off and bomb Iran. Because you have to remember, who is Iran in line with? Russia, China, and they're going to see this as an act of aggression, and this will start war. And hopefully they don't go to this extreme. Hopefully it's just all talk, but we're going to have to watch that situation very, very carefully. Now here's an update that what's going on in Yemen right now. United Nations Humanitarian Agency reported about 182 dead, hundreds more wounded, and this is just from Wednesday to Sunday. Some 75,000 people have been displaced in the past week. Saudi Arabia now controls the Yemeni ports. The UN Human Rights Office in Geneva reports that more than half of those killed are civilians. And we can see that Saudis are blocking humanitarian relief from entering Yemen. Red Cross officials say they are still trying to negotiate permission to deliver medical aid to the war-torn country. They express growing alarm at the number of civilians being killed in Yemen. The Saudi-U.S. coordinated terrorist attacks are targeting entirely domestic areas. They're not hitting military objectives. They're hitting civilian areas. Yemen's Houthis are no Iran proxy. The history of the Houthis shows that far from an invention of Iran, their origins were entirely domestic in nature. Backlash against the political corruption that has defined the nation for decades. Salih often accused the Houthis of being an Iran proxy, though the U.S. State Department confirmed this was not the case whatsoever. And we can see right now they're just doing whatever they possibly can to push the people back. They don't want them taking over that country. Now we see that Saudi Arabia, with their airstrikes, they hit the Russian consulate general, destroyed the thing, and there's not even a single window left intact. In the beginning right now, Saudi Arabia was saying, no, you cannot come in and rescue and evacuate the people. And Russia was denied access, and then all of a sudden Saudi Arabia said, oh, no, wait a minute. No, we'll let you come in. And it seems that Russia has brought in planes, and they have removed about 300 Russians, including diplomatic staff and civilians from the capital. And more planes are coming in to get the rest out. We see the Houthis, they have taken control of the presidential residence in Yemen. There was unknown soldiers entering Yemen, and those turned out to be the Chinese military. They came in, disembarking in the port of Aden, and they basically tried to evacuate all of their diplomatic people and foreign citizens. They didn't get them all, but they came in, swiped them up, and left. And we can see right now the U.S. Navy is joining in with the Saudi Arabia attacks. This is all orchestrated by the United States government. U.S. warships joined the strikes against the Houthi rebel positions in the Yemeni capital. They launched a cruise missile on a strengthened missile brigade. And basically they did this because the Saudi Arabia-led coalition missed it completely, and the U.S. Navy decided, you know what, let's just help out a little bit and destroy a couple of the things that's going on right here. And we know that this is all part of the U.S., and they really can't get involved because they do not have the authorization for war. The Houthi leader is out there and saying, listen, we are ruling out negotiations with the president of Haiti. He has been thrown out of the country. He is no longer the president. And you have foreign forces in here fighting us. There is going to be no negotiations. Now, out in Syria, we see the Islamic State is getting closer to Assad. Basically, the fighters from the Islamic State have a new base of operations just 6 kilometers from the residence of Assad. And basically what's happening is the United States government central bankers are pushing their proxy army, which is the Islamic State, into Damascus. And eventually what's going to happen is the United States is going to fly in, or the coalition's going to fly in and bomb Damascus. And if they hit Assad, oh well, we got him. And we can see this is their plan from the beginning. They're not going after the Islamic State. They're going after Assad. Now, we've had reports that people are being recruited by the Islamic State, and last Friday, the FBI announced that they've captured Americans planning to join the Islamic State and launch attacks within the United States. The case of the 2 Illinois men, Army National Guard specialists, Hassan Edmonds and his cousin Jonas Edmonds, they were allegedly involved in the former, they were involved in going into Syria to join the Islamic State, and basically the FBI stepped in and they thwarted the plans. And basically these two are patsies. They set them up. And of course the headlines like in the Washington Post, FBI disrupts plot to kill scores as military base on behalf of the Islamic State. Well, all these corporate media outlets, they seem to not mention one thing, is that they weren't dealing with the Islamic State. They were contacted by the FBI. Everything was set up by the FBI. They were patsies. And now we see federal agents here in the U.S. have arrested 2 women who plan to detonate a bomb in New York City. Again, more patsies. So basically, the Islamic State is not in Brooklyn, not in New York. It's the FBI. Pretending, finding those people which they can easily turn into a patsy and then use them and trap them. That's all they're doing. All of this is propaganda that 20, 30, 50,000 people are leaving the country to join the Islamic State. It's absolutely ridiculous. Now, I want to talk about Jade Helm a little bit further here. We understand that this is going to happen in about 10 or 12 states right now. And we realize that most of these states have very lax gun laws. And we realize that soldiers are going to come in and they're going to be operating undetected among civilian population in towns and cities. And they're going to be setting up cells of people and test how well they're able to move around without getting too noticed in the community. They're going to be testing their abilities to basically blend in with the local environment and not stand out and blow their cover. So we can see there are many agendas at play here. And what really disturbs, the whole thing disturbs me, but this part of it, because I'm thinking back to agent provocateurs, it seems that they want to blend in to each of these all these communities and seek out the patriots, those people who are basically a threat to the authority of the government, infiltrate the groups, and then use what they know to rile them up and get them to do something, and maybe use weapons and maybe start something which will then spread across these many states and then eventually to the country. And we can see that this could be one thing that they're trying to do. And this would be a false flag event. Now, why would they want to do this? Well, they're going into the states like Florida, Arizona, Texas. These states all have weapons. Now, not all of them, but most of them do. This would be a perfect place to do this, to set something up. So guess what can they do with this? Well, if they can get this to spread, and they started out just like they did in Ferguson when the people found out that the police were throwing bottles, Molotov cocktails, rocks into businesses to get the other people to join in. The same thing I see happening here with this Jade Helm, with the armed forces, whoever they are, blending in and infiltrating these groups. And I can see that they're trying to do this to basically declare martial law. We see that there's a Republican congressional candidate, and this is Greg Palin, a former candidate for Georgia's 4th Congressional District, claims in a Facebook post that militias across the country are on high alert in preparation of Jade Helm. Now, the question is, why would they do all this? Why would they want to declare martial law? Well, it gives them some things where they can use to control the people. First, if martial law was declared in America, the first thing that would happen is the U.S. Constitution would be suspended. In other words, you would suddenly have no rights at all. There would be no freedom of speech, no freedom of press, no freedom of assembly, and you would be arrested at any time for any reason whatsoever. For the duration of the emergency, the military would be in control. There would be troops in the streets, there would be curfews, of course, and there would be checkpoints everywhere. If the emergency lasted long enough, we would probably see authorities go house to house confiscating firearms, ammunition, food, gold, whatever you have. And perhaps most troubling of all, dissidents or subversives would likely be rounded up and imprisoned, and a lot of people might be taken off to FEMA camps. And again, we have to remember, this is nothing new. Back in the 50s, the FBI had a plan to do this. And the plan was, and we mentioned this in other reports, Plan C during the Cold War, which could have triggered in the event of the U.S. underwent a nuclear attack. It included putting the nation under martial law. And we see right now that this could be one of the reasons why they're doing this, because this exercise does not protect America and the people from terrorists whatsoever. Actually, it goes after the people of the United States. And all of this we're going to have to keep an eye on, because we have to remember the drills are going to start in July. It seems like some of them have already started. We've seen that in Florida. We hear in Connecticut there are troops practicing right now. And that's not even part of Jade Helm. So we're going to have to watch the situation. We're going to have to get the reports in from all over the place to see if we can piece together the puzzle of what's actually happening. But we need all our eyes open to make sure we understand what could happen in this scenario. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.